Hey night traveler, welcome to the Stealth Podcast. Here, you'll hear chilling stories to help you drift to sleep or keep you awake. Before we start, drop a comment telling me what time you're tuning in and where you're listening from. Now, kill the lights, put your headphones on, and let's hit the road. My name is Derek Holloway. I'm 43 years old, and I live in Asheville, North Carolina. I'd been doing the Vanlife thing for about 2 years when this happened, sold my apartment, bought a 2019 Ford Transit, converted it myself with pine panels and a fold-out bed. My girlfriend Melissa thought I was crazy at first, but after our third trip together, she was hooked. She's 38, works remotely as a graphic designer, same dark humor as me, same love for finding those off-the-beaten-path spots where you can park for free and wake up to something beautiful. We'd done the Blue Ridge Parkway, the Smoky Mountains, even made it out to Big Sur last summer. But we'd never done Florida, and honestly, I don't know why we waited so long. We left Asheville on a Tuesday morning in late September, planning to spend 3 weeks exploring the Gulf Coast. Melissa had this whole route mapped out: Pensacola, Cedar Key, some state parks near Tampa. But you know how it goes with Vanlife. The best moments are the unplanned ones. We'd been on the road for about a week when we stumbled onto this little dirt road off Highway 19, somewhere between Chiefland and Fanning Springs. There was this hand-painted sign that just said Nature Trail, 2 miles, with an arrow pointing into the woods. The kind of thing most people drive right past, but not us. Melissa looked at me with that grin she gets, the one that means we're about to do something stupid, and I turned onto that road without even thinking twice. The van bounced over ruts and exposed roots, Spanish moss hanging so low it scraped across the roof. The road opened up into this clearing after about 10 minutes of slow driving. And I mean, it was perfect. There was this abandoned ranger station or something, windows all boarded up, paint peeling off in long strips. Beyond it, the forest pressed in thick and dark, and you could hear water moving somewhere close by, probably a spring or a creek. No other vehicles, no beer cans or trash, nothing to suggest anyone had been here in months. This is it, Melissa said, already unbuckling her seatbelt. This is the spot. We parked facing the tree line, killed the engine, and just sat there for a minute listening to the cicadas. It was that golden hour light, you know, when everything looks like a painting. I remember thinking this was exactly why we did this. These moments of finding something that felt like ours alone. We spent the rest of the evening setting up camp, cooking pasta on our little propane stove, drinking cheap wine from tin cups. Melissa kept saying how peaceful it was, how she could actually feel her shoulders relaxing for the first time in weeks. Around 9, we heard an owl somewhere in the trees, and she got this childlike excitement on her face, grabbed my hand and squeezed it. "We should do this more often," she said. "Just disappear into random places." I agreed, clinking my cup against hers. The scary thing is, I meant it. I had no idea that within 12 hours, I'd be wishing we'd never turned off that highway. That by morning, everything I thought I understood about the world would be different. But right then, sitting in the glow of our string lights with Melissa's head on my shoulder, I felt safer than I had in years. Around 11, we climbed into the back of the van and got ready for bed. The temperature had dropped maybe 10 degrees, enough to be comfortable without being cold. Melissa was out within minutes. She always sleeps like the dead when we're camping. But I've never been good at falling asleep in new places, so I just lay there listening to the sounds outside. The forest at night has this quality to it, this aliveness that's different from daytime. You hear things moving, branches cracking, animals calling to each other. Most of it's harmless, just nature doing its thing. But every now and then, you hear something that doesn't quite fit. Something that makes your brain go quiet and your ears strain. That's when I heard it. Not footsteps exactly, more like the sound of something heavy being dragged across dirt. It stopped, then started again, rhythmic and deliberate. I sat up slowly, trying not to wake Melissa, and pressed my face against the window. The thing about fear is that it doesn't hit you all at once, it builds. At first, I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a gator dragging something back to the water. We were in Florida, after all, and I'd read enough about the wildlife down here to know that weird sounds were part of the package. But this sound, it had a pattern to it that felt wrong. Drag, pause, drag, pause. Too methodical. Too purposeful. I peered through the window into the darkness, but our string lights only illuminated maybe 15 feet around the van, and beyond that it was just black. Complete, solid black. Melissa stirred beside me, mumbling something in her sleep, and I put my hand on her shoulder without thinking. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to feel like I wasn't alone in that moment, even if she was unconscious. The dragging sound stopped abruptly, and for maybe 30 seconds there was nothing. Just cicadas and my own breathing. I was about to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing when I heard a different sound, metal scraping against metal. It was coming from the front of the van. My heart kicked into overdrive because that wasn't natural, that wasn't wildlife. That was someone messing with our vehicle. I reached for my phone on the little shelf above the bed, hands shaking so bad I almost knocked it onto Melissa's face. No service. Of course no service. We were miles from anywhere, down a dirt road that probably didn't even show up on Google Maps. I thought about waking Melissa up, but what would I even say? Hey, I think someone's outside. That would just terrify both of us, and maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was nothing. But then the van rocked slightly, like someone had leaned their weight against it. That's when I knew for sure. Someone was out there. Someone had found us in this isolated clearing in the middle of nowhere, and they were circling the van like a predator sizing up prey. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it was just a curious local, maybe someone else looking for a place to camp. But at midnight, on a Tuesday, in a spot this remote, the rational part of my brain was screaming that something was very, very wrong. I could hear movement now, footsteps crunching on the dried leaves and pine needles. Slow footsteps, patient footsteps. Whoever was out there wasn't in a hurry. They were taking their time, and somehow that was more disturbing than anything else. It meant they were confident. It meant they'd done this before. I made a decision then that I'd question for the rest of my life. I decided to look. I needed to see who or what was out there, needed to know what we were dealing with. Moving as quietly as I could, I shifted toward the back window, the one with the curtain I could pull aside just an inch without being obvious. My hand was on the fabric when Melissa's voice cut through the silence. "Derek? What are you doing?" She wasn't fully awake yet, that groggy confusion still in her voice. "Shoo," I whispered, maybe a little too harshly. "Someone's outside." I felt her go rigid next to me, felt her breath catch. "What?" She was wide awake now, and I could hear the fear creeping into her tone. "Stay quiet," I said, still whispering. "Just stay quiet and don't move." I pulled the curtain aside maybe half an inch and pressed my eye to the gap. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was a man standing about 20 feet from the van, just at the edge where our lights met the darkness. He was big, maybe 6'2", broad shoulders, wearing what looked like hunting clothes. But it wasn't his size that scared me. It was the way he was standing, completely still, just watching the van. His face was in shadow, but I could feel his eyes on us, could feel the weight of his attention like a physical thing. In his right hand, hanging loose at his side, was something that caught the light, something metallic and long. A knife, maybe, or a machete. And at his feet, barely visible in the dim glow, was what looked like a large canvas bag, the kind you'd use for laundry or camping gear. Except it wasn't lying flat. It had shape to it. Wait, my mind didn't want to complete that thought, didn't want to acknowledge what that bag might contain. The man tilted his head slightly, like he was listening, and then he smiled. I jerked back from the window so fast I banged my head against the van's metal frame. The pain barely registered. All I could think about was that smile, not a friendly smile, not a confused neighbor smile. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what they were doing and was enjoying it. Melissa grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging in through my shirt. "What did you see?" she hissed. I couldn't answer right away. My throat had closed up, and when I tried to speak, nothing came out except this pathetic wheezing sound. "Derek." She shook me hard enough to snap me back. "There's a man," I managed. "Right outside. He's just standing there watching us, and he has something in his hand. Something sharp." Melissa's face went pale even in the dim light. "Oh God. Oh God, Derek, what do we do?" That's the question, isn't it? What do you do when you're parked in the middle of nowhere with no cell service, and someone who looks like they stepped out of your worst nightmare is standing outside your only shelter? Every horror movie I'd ever seen flashed through my mind. All the stupid decisions people make, all the ways things go wrong. Starting the engine felt like suicide. The noise would alert him that we knew he was there, and besides, we'd have to get up front to drive, which meant exposing ourselves. But staying put seemed just as dangerous. We were trapped in a metal box with windows on all sides and only 2 doors. If he wanted in badly enough, he'd get in. Maybe he'll just leave, Melissa whispered, but I could hear in her voice that she didn't believe it. Neither did I. People don't stand motionless in the dark watching occupied vehicles because they're lost or curious. Minutes crawled by like hours. We stayed frozen in the back of the van, barely breathing, listening to every sound. For a while, there was nothing, just the normal night noises and our own racing hearts. I started to think maybe he had left, maybe we'd gotten lucky. Then the van rocked again, harder this time, and we both bit back screams. He was right up against the driver's side now. I could hear him moving along the length of the van, his hand or something else scraping against the metal exterior. It sounded like he was testing it, checking for weak points. When he reached the back door, he stopped. Complete silence. We stared at the door handle, watching it with the kind of intensity you'd watch a bomb. If it moved even a fraction of an inch, I was ready to completely lose it. Melissa had tears running down her face, and she pressed her fist against her mouth to keep quiet. Then came 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not aggressive pounding, just knock, knock, knock. Like a neighbor stopping by to borrow sugar. That's what made it so disturbing. The casualness of it. The confidence. "I know you're awake in there," a voice called out. Deep, with a slight southern drawl. Almost friendly. "Saw you moving around." My stomach dropped. He'd been watching longer than I thought. How long had he been out here before I even heard the dragging sound? Had he watched us cook dinner? Watched us laugh and drink wine? The thought made me feel violated in a way I'd never experienced before. Melissa looked at me with wide, desperate eyes that asked, "Do we answer?" I shook my head frantically. Every instinct I had screamed not to engage, not to confirm our presence, even though he obviously knew we were here. "That's all right," the voice continued after a pause. "You don't have to talk. I get it. You're scared. That's natural." There was another pause, and I heard him shift his weight. "You picked a bad spot to camp, though. Real bad spot. See, these woods, they got history. Had a fellow used to bring people out here back in the 70s and 80s. Young couples, mostly. Hitchhikers. Tourists who got lost." He chuckled, and the sound made my skin crawl. "Police found 17 bodies buried within a half-mile radius of where you're parked. Took him 3 years to find them all. Of course, that was before they caught him. Gerard Schaefer, his name was. Real piece of work, that one. Used to be a cop himself, if you can believe it." The way he said it, casual, conversational, like he was giving a history lesson, was somehow worse than if he'd been screaming threats. Because it meant he wasn't angry or desperate. He was in control, and this was all part of some sick script he'd played out before. I didn't know if what he was saying was true, but it didn't matter. The detail, the specificity, he knew these woods, knew their history, and he was using that knowledge to terrorize us. Melissa had gone completely rigid beside me, her breathing coming in short, panicked gasps. I squeezed her hand, trying to ground both of us, trying to think through the fog of fear that had settled over my brain. We needed a plan. We couldn't just sit here and wait for whatever he had in mind. "You know what the funny thing is?" the voice continued. "Schaefer used to tell the girls he was protecting them. Said these woods were dangerous, that he was keeping them safe. And they'd believe him at first. Because who questions a cop, right?" Another chuckle, darker this time. "Then he'd bring him out here, to clearings just like this one. Isolated. Quiet. Perfect." The metallic scraping sound came again, closer now, right against the back door. He was dragging something against it. That knife or machete or whatever the hell he was holding. The sound set my teeth on edge, made every nerve in my body fire at once. "Stop it," Melissa suddenly said, her voice stronger than I expected. "Just stop it and leave us alone." I wanted to tell her not to engage, but it was too late. The scraping stopped immediately. "There we go," the man said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "See? That wasn't so hard. You got a name, honey." Melissa looked at me, horror dawning on her face as she realized her mistake. "Don't answer," I whispered, but he must have heard me. "That's smart advice from your boyfriend there. Never give your name to strangers. That's basic safety. Your parents teach you that." He moved again, and this time I heard him walk around to the passenger side. I could track his position by the sound of his boots on the ground, could picture him circling the van like he had all the time in the world. "Here's the thing, though," he said, his voice slightly muffled now that he was on the far side. "I already know everything I need to know about you two. Been watching since you pulled in around 6 o'clock. Saw your North Carolina plates. Saw all your cute little solar panels and your string lights. Real nice setup you got. Must have cost some money to build out. My blood went cold. 6 o'clock. That was 3 hours before I'd even heard the first sound. He'd been out there the entire evening, just watching, just waiting. The thought of him standing in the darkness while we cooked and laughed and felt safe made me physically ill. I looked at Melissa and mouthed the words, "We need to run." Her eyes went even wider, and she shook her head violently. I understood her fear. Running meant leaving our only shelter, meant exposing ourselves in the dark woods with someone who clearly knew the area better than we did. But staying here felt like waiting for the inevitable. At least running gave us a chance, however slim. I pointed toward the back door, then held up 3 fingers. She understood. On 3, we'd throw open the door and sprint for the trees on the opposite side from where he was currently standing. It was maybe 20 feet of open ground. If we were fast, if we were lucky, we might make it before he could react. Melissa nodded, tears streaming down her face, and I grabbed the door handle. 1. I could hear him still talking, something about how beautiful the night was, how peaceful these woods could be. 2. Melissa positioned herself in a runner's crouch, her whole body trembling. 3. I yanked the handle and threw my shoulder against the door. It flew open, and we launched ourselves out into the night. The cool air hit my face as my feet hit the dirt, and for 1 second, one beautiful, hope-filled second, I thought we might actually make it. Then I heard his laugh, loud and delighted, and the sound of him running. Not away from us, toward us. And he was fast, way faster than someone his size should be. "There you go," he shouted, and there was genuine joy in his voice. "That's what I was waiting for. Run, little rabbits, run." The beam of a flashlight swept across the clearing, and I grabbed Melissa's hand as we crashed into the tree line, branches whipping at our faces, roots trying to trip us with every step. We ran blind through the forest, holding onto each other like our lives depended on it, because they did. I had no idea which direction we were going, no sense of where the road might be, or if we were just running deeper into the woods where he wanted us to go. Behind us, I could hear him crashing through the undergrowth, that flashlight beam sweeping back and forth like a searchlight. He wasn't even breathing hard. We'd been running for maybe 2 minutes, and I was already gasping, my lungs burning. But he sounded like he was out for an evening jog. "You're making this too easy," he called out, his voice carrying through the trees. "At least try to hide. Make it interesting." Melissa stumbled over a root, and I caught her before she fell completely, hauling her back up. Her face was scratched from branches, blood running down her cheek, but she didn't make a sound. We veered left around a massive oak tree, and I pulled Melissa down behind it, pressing my finger to my lips. We needed to catch our breath, needed to think. Running blindly was just giving him exactly what he wanted. The flashlight beam passed nearby, maybe 15 feet away, and I could see him now through the gaps in the vegetation. He'd stopped running, was just walking slowly, methodically, shining that light into every shadow. "You know what Schaefer used to do?" he called out conversationally, like we were still having a friendly chat. He'd let him run first. Said it made them more compliant after. Exhausted, scared, all turned around in the dark. Then he'd find him, and they'd be so relieved to see another person, they'd practically beg him for help. He paused, and I heard him moving closer. That's when he'd show them what he really was. Melissa's fingernails dug into my arm so hard I felt skin break. The beam swept closer, and I pressed us both flat against the tree trunk, trying to make ourselves as small as possible. My mind was racing through options. We couldn't outrun him. He knew these woods, and we didn't. We couldn't fight him. He was bigger, armed, and clearly experienced at whatever sick game this was. Our only advantage was that there were 2 of us. If we could separate, split his attention, maybe one of us could get back to the van and drive for help. It was a long shot, but it was something. I leaned close to Melissa's ear and breathed the words. "When I say go, you run back toward the van. I'll go the other way. Draw him off." She grabbed my face with both hands, shaking her head desperately, but I pulled away. It was the only play we had. The flashlight beam moved past our tree, heading away from us. "Now or never. Go," I whispered, and I shoved Melissa in the direction of the clearing before taking off at a sprint in the opposite direction. I made as much noise as I could, snapping branches, shouting, anything to make sure he heard me and not her. It worked. I heard him change direction immediately, Heard him laugh again, that horrible, delighted laugh. There you are. The flashlight locked onto me, and suddenly the forest was lit up like daytime. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life, my heart slamming against my ribs, legs pumping. A branch caught my shoulder and spun me around, and I went down hard on my side. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and for a few seconds I just lay there gasping like a fish, unable to move. The footsteps got closer, slower now. He knew he had me. I rolled onto my back and saw him standing over me. That flashlight pointed right at my face, so I couldn't see his features clearly. Just a dark silhouette haloed by light. "Good effort," he said, genuinely sounding impressed. "Real good effort. Your girlfriend, though, she's got about 30 seconds before she realizes I punctured 2 of your tires while you were sleeping earlier. Van's not going anywhere." The words hit me like a physical blow. He'd been planning this. Every step of it. We'd never had a chance. He crouched down beside me, and I finally saw his face clearly. Late 50s, weathered skin, cold blue eyes that didn't look quite human. And that smile. Always that smile. "Now," he said, pulling something from his belt. "Let's talk about what happens next. See, you and me, we're going to take a little walk. Back to where I left my supplies." He gestured vaguely behind him. "And you're going to help me with something. Call it a history lesson." My name is Patricia Vance. I'm 51 years old, and I live in Portland, Oregon. I'd been documenting my van life journey on YouTube for about 8 months when I decided to head down to Florida. My channel wasn't huge, maybe 12,000 subscribers, but it was enough to make some side income while I traveled. I'm a divorced empty nester. My kids are grown and living their own lives. And after spending 25 years as a dental hygienist, I finally said screw it and bought myself a 2018 Dodge ProMaster. Painted it this gorgeous turquoise color, built out the interior with reclaimed wood, installed a little editing station in the back. My whole brand was solo female van life over 50, showing other women my age that you don't need a man or a trust fund to live this lifestyle. Just courage and a decent credit score. I'd been planning the Florida trip for months, mapping out all the best coastal spots and hidden gems. My viewers had been requesting it constantly. Everyone wanted to see the Keys, the Everglades, all those iconic Florida locations. I flew into Miami, picked up some supplies, and started working my way up the Atlantic coast. Spent a few days in Fort Lauderdale, filmed some content in Palm Beach, then decided to cut inland toward Lake Okeechobee. I'd read about this amazing wildlife preserve near Belle Glade where you could see alligators and rare birds, and I thought it would make great footage. The drive out there was gorgeous, flat farmland stretching for miles, sugarcane fields swaying in the wind, that big Florida sky overhead. I remember feeling so free, so alive, singing along to Fleetwood Mac with the windows down. I found a camping spot just off Route 80, down this little access road that led to a boat launch. It was late afternoon, maybe 4:30, and the light was perfect for filming my sunset routine. There were a couple of fishing boats still out on the water, and I could see a few other vehicles in the parking area. Looked like locals, people who knew the area. That always made me feel safer, you know? Having other people around, even if they weren't close by. I set up my camera on the tripod outside the van and did my usual intro. Hey beautiful souls, it's Patricia here, and welcome back to another day of van life adventures. I talked about the drive, showed off the lake view, did a little tour of what I was cooking for dinner. Just normal content creation stuff. The kind of thing I'd done hundreds of times before. After I finished filming, I cooked myself some rice and beans on my portable stove and sat in my camp chair watching the sun go down over the water. It was peaceful in that way that makes you forget all your problems, the divorce, the loneliness, the constant worry about money, and whether this whole lifestyle thing was sustainable. Out here, none of that mattered. It was just me and the lake and the sound of birds calling to each other as the light faded. Around 7, most of the fishing boats had come in, and I noticed the other vehicles in the parking area had cleared out. I was alone now, but that didn't bother me. I'd camped solo in way more isolated places than this. I had my pepper spray, my door locks, my phone fully charged. I'd learned how to be smart about safety without letting fear control my life. I spent the evening editing footage on my laptop, uploading some photos to Instagram, responding to comments from viewers. Around 9:30, I heard a vehicle pull into the parking area. I glanced out my window and saw it was a white panel van, older model, maybe from the 90s. It parked about 50 feet away from me, near the boat ramp. A man got out, couldn't see him clearly in the dark, but he seemed to be alone. He walked down to the water's edge, stood there for a few minutes looking out at the lake, then got back in his van. Didn't leave, though, just sat there with the engine off. It struck me as a little odd, but I told myself maybe he was doing the same thing I was, just enjoying the solitude, maybe sleeping in his vehicle. Still, something about it made me uneasy. That little voice in the back of your head that tells you when something's off. I made sure all my doors were locked and closed the curtains on the windows facing his van. I tried to focus on my editing, but I kept glancing toward where that white van was parked. Through a gap in my curtain, I could just barely see it in the darkness. No interior lights, no movement that I could detect. Maybe he was sleeping. Maybe he was just sitting there on his phone. Or maybe he was watching me the same way I was watching him. That thought made my skin crawl, and I forced myself to look away. You can't live your life in fear, I reminded myself. That was the whole point of this journey, to prove that women my age could be independent and adventurous. I wasn't going to let some random guy in a van spook me. I went back to my laptop, put in my earbuds, and lost myself in the footage from earlier. The sunset shots had turned out beautiful, really beautiful. About 20 minutes later, I heard a knock on my door. Not aggressive, just a normal knock, but it scared me so badly I actually yelped. My heart was instantly racing. I pulled out my earbuds and sat there frozen, staring at the door like it might explode. Another knock, slightly louder this time. "Hello." A man's voice, muffled through the metal. "Sorry to bother you, ma'am. I'm having some car trouble. You wouldn't happen to have a phone I could use?" I didn't answer immediately. Every safety video I'd ever watched, every true crime podcast I'd listened to, they all said the same thing. Don't open your door for strangers at night. Don't engage. But my phone was right there on the counter, fully charged. And what if this guy was legitimately in trouble? What if he had a family emergency or something? I have a phone. I finally called back, not moving toward the door. But I'm not comfortable opening up right now. It's late. There was a pause, and I could feel him on the other side of that door, could sense his presence. "I understand completely," he said, and his voice sounded reasonable, almost apologetic. "I get it. Woman alone, strange man knocking on her door. You're being smart. But my phone died, and I really need to call my wife. She's gonna worry if I don't check in." The wife detail felt intentional, like he was trying to make himself seem safe and normal. Married men don't hurt people, right? That's what he wanted me to think. "There's no service out here anyway," I said. "I checked earlier. You'd have to drive back toward Belglade to get a signal." Another pause, longer this time. I heard him shift his weight, heard something that sounded like a sigh. "You're probably right," he said. "I just thought. Well, never mind. Sorry to bother you. You have a good night." I heard footsteps moving away from my van, crunching on the gravel. Through my curtain gap, I watched his silhouette walk back toward the white van. He got in, and I saw the interior light come on briefly before the door closed. Then nothing, just darkness and silence. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. See, nothing to worry about. Just a guy with a dead phone. I was being paranoid. But even as I told myself that, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That little voice was screaming now, telling me to start the engine and leave. But leave and go where? It was almost 10 at night, I was tired, and the next town was 20 miles away. I decided to compromise with my anxiety. I'd sleep in the driver's seat tonight instead of the bed, keys in the ignition, ready to leave at the first sign of trouble. It wasn't comfortable, but it felt safer. I brushed my teeth using my water bottle, changed into sweatpants and a hoodie, clothes I could run in if necessary, and climbed into the front seat. I reclined it as far as it would go and pulled a blanket over myself. Through the windshield, I had a clear view of the white van. I watched it for a while, my eyes adjusting to the darkness, looking for any movement. Nothing, just a van sitting in a parking lot. Eventually, exhaustion started to win over anxiety, and my eyelids got heavy. I told myself I'd just close my eyes for a minute, just rest them. That was my first mistake of the night. I don't know how long I was asleep. Maybe an hour, maybe less, when I woke up to the sound of my back door rattling. Not knocking this time. Rattling, like someone was trying the handle, testing to see if it was locked. I was wide awake instantly, my heart exploding in my chest. I sat up slowly, trying not to make noise, trying to see what was happening. The rattling stopped. Then I heard footsteps moving along the side of my van, slow and deliberate. He was checking every door, every window, looking for a way in. I reached for my phone with shaking hands, but when I turned on the screen, I saw what I already knew. No service. No way to call for help. The footsteps stopped at my driver's side window, and I heard breathing. He was standing right there, inches away from me, separated only by glass. I couldn't see his face in the darkness, just his outline. "I know you're awake," he said softly. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Every muscle in my body was locked up with terror. Maybe if I stayed completely still, he'd think I was asleep, think he'd made a mistake. But he tapped on the glass with something metal, maybe a ring, maybe a tool, and the sound was like a gunshot in the silence. "I can see you sitting up," he said, his voice still soft, almost conversational. "Come on now, don't play games. We both know you're awake." My hand moved to the ignition, fingers closing around the keys. One turn, and the engine would roar to life. I could throw it in reverse, floor it, get the hell out of here. But my hands were shaking so badly, I couldn't grip the key properly. It slipped between my fingers once, twice, and I bit back a sob of frustration. "You seem like a nice lady," he continued. "Saw your YouTube channel. Vanlife After 50, right? I watched some of your videos earlier today. You've got a good setup here. Real professional." The words hit me like ice water. He knew who I was. He'd researched me. This wasn't random. This was planned. My channel had my route posted, my general locations, everything someone would need to find me. I'd been so proud of building an audience, so excited about the engagement, that I'd never considered the danger. Never thought about who might be watching with different intentions. 12,000 subscribers, he said. "That's impressive. Bet you make decent money off that. Ads, sponsorships, all that." He was circling the van again, his voice moving as he walked. "Must be nice, traveling alone, answering to nobody. Freedom, right? That's what you talk about in your videos. Freedom." I finally got my fingers around the key and turned it. The engine started with a beautiful, powerful rumble, and I immediately slammed the gear shift into reverse. My foot hit the gas, and the van lurched backward. For one glorious second, I thought I was getting away. Then I felt the resistance. Heard the horrible scraping sound. The van wasn't moving right. It was dragging, pulling to one side. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw it. My back right tire was completely flat. Not just low. Flat. He'd slashed it while I was asleep. Maybe slashed more than one. I was trapped. "That's not gonna work," he called out, and I could hear the amusement in his voice. "I'd save your gas if I were you. Got a long night ahead." I threw the van in drive and tried going forward instead, thinking maybe I could drive on the flat tire, just get some distance between us. The van lurched forward maybe 10 feet before I heard a loud pop and felt the whole vehicle drop on the left side too. Both rear tires now. He'd booby-trapped me somehow, set it up so that trying to escape would just disable the van completely. I was sobbing now, couldn't help it. All that carefully maintained calm just disintegrating. I laid on the horn, held it down, the sound blaring across the empty parking lot and out over the dark water. Maybe someone would hear. Maybe someone camping nearby would come investigate. The horn echoed back at me from across the lake, and then there was just silence. Nobody was coming. We were alone out here. "That was stupid," the man said, and for the first time, there was an edge to his voice. Anger. "That was really stupid. I was trying to be nice about this, trying to make it easy for both of us." I heard him walk to the back of the van, heard something scraping against metal. Then the smell hit me, gasoline. He was pouring gasoline. "Here's how this works," he said, his voice calm again, controlled. "You open this door in the next 30 seconds, or I light a match. Your choice. But either way, you're coming out." I stared at the door handle, my mind completely blank with terror. This couldn't be happening. This was the kind of thing that happened to other people, to characters in movies, not to 51-year-old women from Portland who just wanted to see the country. 20 seconds. I could smell the gasoline getting stronger, could imagine the liquid pooling beneath my van, surrounding me. 15 seconds. My phone was useless, my van was disabled, and I was about to be burned alive if I didn't comply. 10 seconds. I thought about my kids, about how they'd find out their mother died in some parking lot in Florida. How they'd watch my final video and know that I'd posted my location, had basically drawn a map for a predator. 5 seconds. "Okay," I screamed. Okay, I'm coming out. Don't light it. Please don't light it. The countdown stopped. Smart girl, he said. Now open it slow. Hands where I can see them. And Patricia, don't try anything heroic. I've done this before. My hand moved to the door handle like it belonged to someone else. I watched it grip the metal, watched it pull, and the door swung open into the humid Florida night. The smell of gasoline was overwhelming now, making my eyes water. I stepped down from the van, my legs nearly giving out beneath me, and I got my first clear look at him. He was maybe 45, average height, thinning brown hair, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt. The kind of guy you'd pass in a grocery store without a second glance. Completely ordinary except for his eyes. They had this flatness to them, like looking at a doll's eyes. No warmth, no empathy, just cold calculation. In his right hand, he held a jerry can of gasoline. In his left, a lighter. There we go, he said, setting the jerry can down but keeping the lighter. That wasn't so hard, was it? I stood there shaking, my arms wrapped around myself. What do you want? My voice came out small and broken. Money? I have maybe $300 cash. You can have it. You can have all of it. He smiled, and it was the worst smile I'd ever seen. Not cruel exactly, just empty. I don't want your money, Patricia. I want you to walk with me, down to the water. He gestured toward the boat ramp with the lighter, and I saw there was a small aluminum boat tied there that I hadn't noticed before. His boat. He'd planned this entire thing. Knew exactly where to bring me. Please, I said, tears streaming down my face now. Please, I have kids. I have 2 daughters. They're 23 and 26. They need me. I'll give you anything. I'll do anything. Just please let me go. He tilted his head, studying me like I was an interesting insect. They're not kids anymore, Patricia. They're grown women. They'll be fine. Sad for a while, sure, but they'll move on. Everyone does. The casualness of it, the way he dismissed my daughter's grief like it was nothing, made something snap inside me. Rage cut through the fear, just for a second. Fuck you, I spat. His expression didn't change. There it is, he said quietly. There's that fight. I was wondering when I'd see it. You hide it well in your videos. All that positivity and empowerment. But underneath, you're angry, aren't you? Angry at your ex-husband. Angry at getting older. Angry at a world that makes women like you invisible. He was right, and that made it worse. I was angry. Had been for years. The divorce had gutted me, left me feeling worthless and used up. The Vanlife thing was supposed to be about reclaiming my power, proving I didn't need anyone. But here I was, completely powerless, about to die in a parking lot because I'd been too proud to admit I was scared. Start walking, he said, gesturing toward the water again. Slowly, hands where I can see them. I didn't move, couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the ground. If I walked down to that boat, I was dead. I knew it with absolute certainty. At least here, in the parking lot, I had a chance. Could scream, could run, could fight. Out on the water, there would be nothing. Just him and me and the darkness. I said walk. His voice was harder now, and he flicked the lighter. A small flame appeared, dancing in the breeze. Or I go back to plan A and torch your van with you in it. Your choice, but you're running out of time to decide. I thought about all those true crime documentaries I'd watched, all the survival stories. They always said the same thing. Never let them take you to a secondary location. Fight here. Fight now, because wherever they're taking you is where they plan to kill you. But they also said comply if there's an immediate deadly threat. Was the lighter an immediate threat? Could I rush him before he dropped it on the gasoline? My brain was spinning, trying to calculate odds, trying to find a way out that didn't exist. Fine, I heard myself say. I'll walk. Just put out the lighter. He considered this, then clicked it off. The darkness felt heavier without that small flame. Good decision, he said. Now move. I started walking toward the water on legs that felt like they might collapse at any moment. He stayed about 6 feet behind me, close enough to grab me if I ran, but far enough that I couldn't spin around and attack. We passed the white van, and I saw the side door was open. Inside, I caught a glimpse of something that made my stomach turn. Rope, plastic sheeting, tools I didn't want to identify. This wasn't his first time. How many other women had walked down to that boat? How many other Vanlife travelers had he watched, stalked, trapped? You know what they called me back in the day? He said conversationally as we walked. The I-95 killer. Because I'd follow the interstate up and down the East Coast. Different states, different victims, different dumping sites. Made it real hard for the cops to connect the dots. The I-95 killer. The name rang a bell somewhere in the back of my mind. Something I'd maybe heard on a podcast years ago. A case from the late 90s, early 2000s. They'd caught someone for it, hadn't they? Or maybe they hadn't. My thoughts were too scattered to remember clearly. We were almost at the water's edge now, maybe 20 feet from that aluminum boat. I could hear the lake lapping against the shore, could smell the muddy water mixed with the gasoline still clinging to my clothes. This was it. This was where it ended. Unless I did something. Anything. My hand moved to my pocket where I kept my pepper spray, fingers closing around the small canister. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Get in the boat," he said, and I heard him move closer. This was my only chance. I spun around fast, pulling out the pepper spray and aiming for his face. I pressed down on the trigger, and nothing. The canister hissed empty. I'd never checked it, never replaced it, and now it was just a useless piece of plastic in my shaking hand. He looked at me almost sadly. "That's expired," he said. "Probably been sitting in your pocket for months. You really should check that stuff regularly." Then he moved, faster than I thought possible, and his fist connected with my stomach. All the air left my lungs in one horrible whoosh, and I collapsed to my knees in the dirt, gasping, trying desperately to breathe. He grabbed my hair and dragged me toward the boat. I tried to fight, tried to claw at his hand, but I couldn't get any air, couldn't make my body work. He threw me into the boat, and I landed hard on the aluminum bottom, the impact sending fresh waves of pain through my already aching body. He climbed in after me, untied the rope, and used in or to push us away from shore. Within seconds, we were drifting out onto the dark water, the parking lot and my disabled van getting smaller and smaller. I finally managed to suck in some air, my lungs screaming. "Why?" I managed to gasp out. "Why me?" He was rowing now, steady strokes taking us further from land. "No particular reason," he said. "Wrong place, wrong time. You made yourself easy to find. That's really all it takes." The moon had come out from behind clouds, and I could see his face more clearly now in the silver light. Still ordinary, still empty. "They said they caught you." I wheezed, trying to keep him talking, trying to buy time even though I didn't know what for. "The I-95 killer. They said they caught him in 2004. He smiled that dead smile again. "They caught someone," he said. "Guy named Gary Ray Bowles. Killed 6 men up and down I-95. Murdered mostly gay men. Beat them to death in their homes. They executed him in 2019. He paused in his rowing, letting the boat drift. "But see, Gary and me, we were active around the same time, same general area. When they caught him, when they pinned all those murders on him, some of my work got folded into his case. Cops loved having a solved serial killer. Made them look good. Made everyone feel safe. So you just kept going," I said, and despite everything, despite the terror and the pain, I felt a wave of anger. "How many?" He shrugged. "Lost count after 15. Maybe 20 by now. Like I said, up and down the coast. Different states, different victim types. Hitchhikers, prostitutes, van life people like you. Anyone who wouldn't be missed right away. Anyone who put themselves in vulnerable positions. We were in the middle of the lake now, or near enough." He stopped rowing and just sat there looking at me. "You did good content, Patricia. Really inspiring stuff. I especially liked that video about facing your fears. The one where you talked about how being afraid of living alone was worse than anything that could actually happen to you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. "Turns out you were wrong about that." I looked at the water, black and infinite on all sides. Looked at the knife, catching moonlight. Looked at his empty, patient eyes. And I made a decision. If I was going to die tonight, it wouldn't be sitting in this boat waiting for him to decide when and how. I launched myself at him, screaming, clawing, biting, using every ounce of strength I had left. We grappled, the boat rocking violently beneath us. I felt the knife slice across my arm, felt the hot rush of blood, but I didn't stop. My hand found his face, and I dug my thumbs toward his eyes. He roared in pain and threw me back, and suddenly I was falling, hitting the cold water and going under. I came up gasping, my clothes dragging me down, my wounded arm burning. The boat was 10 feet away, him standing in it now, silhouetted against the moon. "Swim for it, Patricia," he called out. "Let's see how far you get." And God help me, I swam. My name is Marcus Chun. I'm 32 years old, and I live in Seattle, Washington. I'd been working as a software engineer for 6 years when I finally burned out completely. 80-hour weeks, constant deadlines, living in a box apartment I barely saw because I was always at the office. My girlfriend left me, said I'd become a robot, and honestly, she wasn't wrong. So I did what any reasonable person having a quarter-life crisis would do. I quit my job, bought a Mercedes Sprinter van, and decided to spend a year traveling while I figured out what I actually wanted from life. My parents thought I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had, but 3 months into the journey, I felt more alive than I had in years. Florida wasn't originally on my route, but my buddy Jason convinced me to meet him down there for a week. He'd moved to Tampa 2 years ago for work, and we'd barely seen each other since. Jason's 34, married to his high school sweetheart Amy, who's 33, and they'd just bought this house in the suburbs with a pool and everything. Living the American dream. Or at least that's what his Instagram made it look like. They invited me to stay in their driveway, but I told them I'd rather find spots to camp nearby and just hang out during the days. I'm not great with prolonged social interaction anymore. One of those things the burnout left me with. I need my alone time to recharge, and sleeping in someone's driveway felt like it would be too much togetherness. I met up with Jason and Amy on a Thursday, spent the day catching up over beers at this brewery in Ybor City. It was good seeing them, hearing about their lives, pretending my nomadic existence was a choice and not me running away from failure. Around 6, Amy mentioned this great spot for camping, said her brother used to go there all the time before he moved to Colorado. It's called the Little Manatee River State Park area, she said. There are some unofficial spots just outside the park boundaries where people camp for free. Super peaceful, right on the water. She pulled up a map on her phone and showed me exactly where to go. Jason nodded enthusiastically. Yeah man, you'll love it. Way better than a parking lot. Real nature, real quiet. I left Tampa around 7:30 that evening, plugged the coordinates into my GPS, and headed south. The drive took maybe 40 minutes, the sun setting orange and pink over the flat Florida landscape. I found the turnoff Amy had marked, just a dirt road cutting into thick palmetto scrub and pine forest. My van bumped along for maybe half a mile before the road opened into a small clearing near the river. It was perfect. The water was maybe 30 feet away, dark and smooth, reflecting the last light of day. Trees surrounded the clearing on 3 sides, creating this natural privacy screen. There was evidence other people had camped here, a fire ring made of stones, some tire tracks in the dirt, but right now, I was alone. Exactly what I wanted. I set up my usual evening routine, opened the side door, put out my camping chair, got my portable stove going to heat up some ramen. While the water boiled, I walked down to the river's edge and just stood there watching the water. There's something about rivers at dusk that always makes me contemplative, the way they just keep moving, indifferent to everything happening around them. I thought about my old life in Seattle, wondered if I'd ever go back to tech, or if this year on the road would change me into someone completely different. My phone buzzed with a text from Jason. You find the spot okay? I sent back a thumbs up and a photo of the river. He replied, nice. Hey, random question. Amy's brother said to mention that area has some weird history. Homeless camps got cleared out a few years back. Some sketchy stuff went down. Just keep your doors locked at night, yeah? I appreciated the concern, but I camped in way sketchier places than this. After I ate, I spent some time reading on my Kindle, listening to the sounds of the Florida night, frogs, insects, the occasional splash in the river that I assumed was fish or maybe a turtle. Around 9:30, I heard a vehicle approaching on the dirt road. Headlights swept across my van, and I tensed up slightly, but then the vehicle passed by my clearing and continued deeper into the woods. Probably another camper looking for their own spot. I gave it another half hour, then climbed into the back of the van and got ready for bed. I'd installed blackout curtains on all the windows for privacy and temperature control, so once they were drawn, it was like being in a cave. Dark, quiet, safe. I lay there in my sleeping bag, feeling the pleasant exhaustion of a day well spent, and drifted off thinking tomorrow I'd explore the actual state park, maybe do some kayaking. I had no idea that the vehicle that had passed by hadn't been looking for a camping spot at all. It had been looking for me. I woke up to silence. Complete, absolute silence. No frogs, no insects, nothing. Just that heavy quiet that feels wrong somehow, like nature itself is holding its breath. I checked my phone. 2:47 a.m. I'd been asleep for maybe 4 hours. I lay there listening, trying to figure out what had woken me up. Sometimes your brain picks up on things before you consciously register them. Sounds or movements that trip some ancient alarm system in your nervous system. I stayed perfectly still, straining my ears. Then I heard it. The soft crunch of footsteps on dried leaves, slow and deliberate, circling my van. My heart rate kicked up immediately. Could be an animal, I told myself. Deer maybe. But deer don't walk in circles. Deer don't move with that kind of methodical patience. The footsteps stopped near my driver's side door. I heard breathing, definitely human, definitely male from the depth of it. Then came the sound of metal scraping against metal, and I realized with growing horror that someone was trying to pick my lock. I'd installed aftermarket locks on all the doors, good ones specifically because I was worried about this exact scenario. But good locks only buy you time, and this person clearly knew what they were doing. I could hear the tools working in the mechanism, patient and practiced. My mind raced through options. I had a tire iron under the driver's seat, pepper spray in the glove compartment, and my phone in my hand. But calling 911 seemed pointless. I was miles from anywhere, and by the time cops arrived, whatever was going to happen would be over. I decided to make noise, let whoever was out there know I was awake and aware. Sometimes that's enough to scare off opportunistic criminals. Hey, I shouted, my voice coming out stronger than I felt. I know you're out there. I've got a gun, and I've already called the police. Complete bluff. I don't own a gun, hadn't called anyone, but maybe it would work. The lock-picking sound stopped immediately. Silence stretched out for what felt like forever. Then a voice, calm and amused. No, you haven't. There's no cell service out here. And if you had a gun, you'd have already fired a warning shot. Shit. He was right on both counts, and now he knew I was bluffing. What do you want? I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. Just want to talk, the voice said. You're Marcus Chun, right? 32, from Seattle, been on the road for 3 months. Used to work at Microsoft before you quit, living that van life dream. My blood went cold. How did he know all that? Had he been following me? Going through my trash? Stalking my social media? I'd been careful about what I posted online, never sharing my exact location until after I'd left, never using my last name publicly. Who are you? I demanded. How do you know that? A soft chuckle from outside. I know lots of things, Marcus. I know you met your friends Jason and Amy at Coppertail Brewery today. I know Amy gave you directions to this spot. I know you're alone out here. No weapon, no way to call for help. He paused. I know you're scared right now, and you should be. This wasn't random. This was planned, targeted, personal somehow. But I'd never seen this person before in my life. At least I didn't think I had. Look, I said, trying to sound reasonable. If this is about money, I don't have much cash, but you can take whatever you want. Just take it and go. Another chuckle. I don't want your money. I want you to come outside. We need to have a conversation, and I'd prefer to do it face to face. Every instinct I had screamed not to open that door. Nothing good happens when you comply with someone making demands in the middle of the night in an isolated location. I'm not coming out, I said firmly. Whatever you want to talk about, we can do it like this. The response came after a long pause, and when it did, the friendly tone was gone. Marcus, I'm going to count to 10. If you're not outside by the time I reach 10, I'm going to slash all 4 of your tires and then set your van on fire. With you in it. Your choice. He started counting. 1. His voice was steady, matter of fact, like he was counting down to a commercial break. 2. I scrambled for my phone, tried desperately to get any kind of signal. Nothing. Not even 1 bar. 3. I could start the engine, try to ram my way out of here, but the dirt road was narrow, and if he'd blocked it with his vehicle, I'd just trap myself. 4. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely think straight. Every self-defense article I'd ever read, every true crime podcast warning, they all said never go to a secondary location, never let them isolate you further. But I was already isolated. 5. I heard liquid splashing against the outside of my van. Gasoline. He wasn't bluffing. Okay, I shouted. Okay, I'm coming out. Just stop. The counting stopped. Smart decision, he said. But Marcus? When you open that door, I want to see both hands immediately. Empty hands. You try anything stupid, and we skip straight to the fire. Understand. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry as sandpaper. I understand. I moved toward the side door, my legs feeling like they might give out. This was insane. This couldn't be happening. 24 hours ago, I'd been drinking craft beer with my friends, laughing about old times. Now I was about to open a door for someone who'd been stalking me, who knew things about me they shouldn't know, who just threatened to burn me alive. My hand touched the door handle, and I hesitated one more second. "I'm waiting," the voice said, and I heard the click of a lighter. That sound made my decision for me. I unlocked the door and pushed it open, stepping down into the humid night air with both hands raised. The man standing about 10 feet away was not what I expected. He looked normal, disturbingly normal. Maybe late 40s, medium build, wearing khaki pants and a polo shirt like he was heading to a golf course. Short, graying hair, glasses, a face you'd forget 5 seconds after seeing it. The only thing that marked him as dangerous was what he was holding. In his left hand, a red gas can, and in his right, a pistol pointed casually at my chest. "There we go," he said with a smile. That wasn't so hard, was it? I stood there with my hands up, trying to control my breathing, trying not to completely panic. "What do you want from me?" My voice cracked on the last word. He studied me for a moment, head tilted like I was an interesting specimen. "You really don't recognize me, do you? We've never met, but we have mutual connections. Jason Weatherly, Amy Weatherly. Ring any bells beyond your friendship?" I shook my head, confused. "I don't understand. What do Jason and Amy have to do with this?" His smile widened. "Everything, Marcus. See, Amy's brother, the one who told her about this camping spot. He was my partner. My business partner, to be specific. We had a very profitable operation going, moving product up and down the I-75 corridor. Meth, mostly. Some pills. The pieces started clicking together in my head, none of them good. Amy's brother, David. I'd met him once, years ago at Jason and Amy's wedding. Quiet guy, kept to himself. I vaguely remembered hearing he'd moved to Colorado, but I'd never asked for details. "That's right, David," the man said. Except David didn't move to Colorado. David got arrested 8 months ago. Federal charges. Facing 20 to life. And you know what David did to reduce his sentence? He gave them names. My name specifically. Told them everything about our operation, our distribution network, our contacts. I've been on the run ever since, and I will not go to prison because David Keller couldn't keep his mouth shut. He stepped closer, the gun never wavering. So I decided David's family should pay for his betrayal. An eye for an eye, biblical style. Horror washed over me as I understood what he was saying. "You're going to kill Jason and Amy." It wasn't a question. He shook his head. "Already did. Earlier tonight, while you were sleeping. Broke into their house around midnight. Made it look like a home invasion gone wrong. Very tragic. Young couple, whole lives ahead of them." He said it so casually, like he was describing a trip to the grocery store. I felt my legs actually buckle, had to lock my knees to stay standing. Jason and Amy. Dead. Because of Amy's brother, because of some drug operation I knew nothing about. Why am I still alive then? I whispered. "Why bring me out here?" He smiled again, and it was the coldest thing I'd ever seen. "Because you're the final piece, Marcus. You were the last person seen with them. Your van was in their driveway earlier. And when the police find your body out here tomorrow, along with evidence linking you to their murders, the story writes itself. Murder-suicide. Disturbed loner, recent breakdown, kills his friends, and then himself out of guilt. Case closed." The world tilted sideways. This wasn't just about killing me. It was about destroying my entire identity, making me a monster in death. My parents would believe I'd murdered my friends. Everyone who knew me would question whether they'd ever really known me at all. "You're insane," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "The police will figure it out. They'll know it wasn't me." He laughed, a genuine sound that made my skin crawl. "Will they? You quit your job with no warning. You've been drifting around the country for months with no fixed address, no real plan. Classic warning signs of mental breakdown. And I've already planted evidence in your van. Jason's wallet, Amy's jewelry. When they search it, they'll find everything they need." My mind raced, trying to find a way out, any way out. He was standing between me and the woods, the gun trained on me, the gas can ready if I tried to run back into the van. I was trapped in every direction. "Bobby Keefe," he said suddenly. "That's my name, in case you were wondering. Not that it matters. You won't be around to tell anyone. But I like my victims to know who killed them. Seems more personal that way, more respectful. Victims, plural. This wasn't his first time. How many people have you killed? I asked, stalling, desperately trying to think of something. He considered the question. Honestly, lost count after the first dozen. Been doing this kind of work for 20 years. Started in Miami back in the 90s, worked my way up to management. 20 years. That meant he'd been active since the early 2000s, maybe longer. A professional killer who'd somehow stayed under the radar, building a body count while looking like someone's accountant. You said you know I worked at Microsoft? I said, grasping at anything. You've done your research, but you missed something important. I'm not alone out here. I have friends checking on me. If I don't text them by morning, they'll come looking. It was a weak bluff, and we both knew it. He smiled indulgently, like I was a child trying to outsmart an adult. Jason was your only friend in Florida, Marcus. And he's not going to be checking on anyone anymore. He was right, and the hopelessness of it crashed over me like a wave. No one was coming. No one even knew exactly where I was except Jason and Amy, and they were dead. Here's how this is going to work, Bobby said, stepping closer. You're going to walk over to that river. You're going to wade in about waist deep. And then you're going to shoot yourself in the head with this gun. He waggled the pistol slightly. I'll put the gun in your hand after. Make sure the powder residue is right. Your body will float downstream, probably get caught in some mangroves. They'll find you in a few days, find Jason and Amy's stuff in your van, and the story is complete. Clean, simple, believable. I won't do it, I said, surprised by the firmness in my own voice. You'll have to shoot me here, and that'll leave evidence. Wrong blood spatter, wrong trajectory. They'll know someone else was involved. For the first time, his smile faltered slightly. You think you're smart, don't you? Tech guy, problem solver. But here's what you're not considering. I don't actually need it to be perfect. I just need it to be good enough. And a body in a river with a gunshot wound? That's good enough. The evidence in your van will do the rest. He raised the gun, pointing it directly at my forehead now. So you can walk to that river, or I can shoot you here and drag you there. Your choice, but you're going in that water either way. I looked at the river, black and waiting. Looked at the gun. Looked at Bobby Keefe's empty, patient eyes. And I thought about something my father used to say when I was a kid learning to code. Every system has a vulnerability. You just have to find it. Bobby's vulnerability was his confidence. He thought he had this all figured out. Thought I was just another victim who'd panic and comply. But I'd spent 6 years solving problems under pressure, finding the holes in systems, exploiting weaknesses. My mind shifted into that mode now. The fear still there, but pushed aside by cold calculation. He needed me in that river for his story to work, which meant between here and there, I had maybe 30 seconds to find an opening. Okay, I said, letting my shoulders slump in defeat. Okay, I'll walk. Just, can I have a minute? 2, I don't know, make peace with it or whatever. He considered this, then nodded. 1 minute, but try anything, and I'll make it hurt first. I stood there for a moment, pretending to gather myself, but really I was calculating. Bobby was maybe 12 feet away. The gun still pointed at me, but his stance had relaxed slightly now that he thought I'd given up. The river was about 30 feet behind me. The woods were to my left, his vehicle somewhere behind him blocking the dirt road. My van was to my right, side door still open, gasoline splashed on the exterior but not lit. The tire iron was under the driver's seat, but I'd never reach it. My pepper spray was in the glove compartment, same problem. But there was something else. Something Bobby didn't know about because it wasn't visible. When I'd built out the van, I'd installed a secondary battery system with a manual disconnect switch on the outside, hidden behind a small panel near the rear wheel well. If I could get to it, if I could flip that switch, the van's alarm system would go haywire, lights flashing, horn blaring. It might only distract him for a second, but a second might be enough. Time's up, Bobby said. Start walking. I took a step toward the river, then another, moving slowly. He followed, staying about 10 feet back, the gun tracking me. You know what's funny? I said, trying to keep him talking, trying to angle our path closer to the van. I almost didn't come to Florida at all. Almost went to Colorado instead. He didn't respond, just gestured with the gun for me to keep moving. We were passing the rear of the van now, and I could see the small panel from the corner of my eye. This is far enough, I said, stopping. If I'm going to die, I want to know something first. Did they suffer? Jason and Amy. It was a calculated question, meant to trigger his ego, his need to talk about his work. And it worked. He smiled. Amy woke up when I came through the bedroom window. Tried to scream, but I had my hand over her mouth before any sound came out. Jason never even knew what hit him. One shot while he was sleeping. Amy, though, she fought. Scratched my arm pretty good. He pulled up his sleeve, showing fresh claw marks. Had to make it look like a struggle anyway, so her fighting actually helped sell the scene. She lasted maybe 5 minutes before the blood loss got her. He said it so clinically, so devoid of emotion. These were people I'd known, people I'd loved, and he'd ended them like they were nothing. The rage that flooded through me was so intense it pushed out the fear entirely. "You're going to burn in hell," I said quietly. He laughed. "Probably, but not today." He gestured with the gun toward the water. "Now move, or I'll dash." That's when I dropped to the ground and rolled toward the van's rear panel. He fired, the shot so loud it felt like the world exploding, but the bullet hit dirt where I'd been standing a second before. My fingers found the panel, ripped it open, and slammed the disconnect switch. Instantly, the van erupted in chaos, lights strobing, horn blasting, the alarm I'd programmed to be as obnoxious as possible screaming into the night. Bobby flinched, his attention pulled to the van for just a fraction of a second, and I launched myself at his legs in a tackle that would have made my high school football coach proud. We hit the ground hard, both of us grunting with impact. The gun went off again, the muzzle flashed bright in the darkness, but I didn't feel any pain, so the shot must have gone wild. I grabbed for his wrist, trying to control the weapon, and we rolled in the dirt, grappling, both fighting for dominance. He was older but stronger than he looked, and he fought with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this before. His elbow caught me in the ribs, and I felt something crack, pain exploding through my side. But I held on to his wrist, held on like my life depended on it, because it did. We rolled again, and suddenly we were at the river's edge, the water inches from our faces. "You stupid dash," Bobby snarled, but I didn't let him finish. I brought my knee up into his groin as hard as I could, and he gasped, his grip loosening for just a second. That second was enough. I twisted the gun toward him and pulled his finger on the trigger. The shot was muffled against his body, and I felt him go rigid. We lay there for a moment, both panting, and then I felt the warmth of blood soaking through his shirt onto my hands. You actually," he said, his voice wet and surprised. I pushed away from him, scrambling backward on my hands and feet until my back hit the van's tire. Bobby rolled onto his side, one hand pressed to his stomach where blood was pumping out between his fingers. The gun had fallen into the shallow water at the river's edge. "Help me," he gasped. Call an ambulance." I sat there shaking, my cracked ribs screaming with every breath, watching this man who'd murdered my friends, who'd planned to murder me, begging for help he'd never have given. The van's alarm was still blaring, lights still flashing. And in the distance, I heard the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard in my life: sirens. My name is Derek Holloway. I'm 43 years old, and I live in Asheville, North Carolina. I'd been doing the van life thing for about 8 months when I decided Florida's Gulf Coast would be perfect for some winter content. My girlfriend Naomi, who's 39, had been skeptical about the whole van conversion project from the start, but she'd warmed up to it after our first few weekend trips. This time, though, she couldn't get the time off from her nursing job, so it was just me and the van, a 2015 Ford Transit I'd named Bertha. I'd been documenting everything on my YouTube channel, posting videos about solar panel installations and compact kitchen builds, slowly building an audience of about 8,000 subscribers who seemed genuinely interested in the lifestyle. The plan was simple: drive down through Georgia, hit the Panhandle, and spend 2 weeks filming content along the forgotten stretches of Route 19. These were the roads tourists didn't take anymore, the ones that got bypassed when the interstate went in. Old Florida, people called it. Spanish moss, roadside diners with peeling paint, mom-and-pop motels with vacancy signs that never turned off. It was exactly the aesthetic my viewers ate up. The first few days went perfectly. I'd park at rest stops, occasionally at a Walmart or Cracker Barrel, always following the unwritten rules of stealth camping. No slide-outs, no leveling jacks, no lawn chairs, nothing that screamed, "I'm living here." Just another white van in a sea of vehicles. By day 4, I was near a town called Braxton, about 40 minutes north of Tampa, when I spotted this old abandoned citrus processing plant off the highway. The sun was setting, casting everything in that golden hour light that makes mediocre footage look cinematic. I couldn't resist pulling off onto the access road to get some shots. That's when I saw her standing by the roadside, thumb out, a duffel bag at her feet. She looked to be in her mid-50s maybe, weathered in that way people get when life's been rougher than it should have been. Bleached blonde hair pulled back, tight jeans, a leather jacket despite the humid 70-degree evening. Something about her reminded me of my Aunt Linda. Same hard edges, same way of standing like she was ready for whatever came next. I slowed down, not really thinking it through, just acting on that instinct we're all supposed to have about helping people. She smiled when I stopped, but it didn't quite reach her eyes, and that should have been my first clue that this night was about to go somewhere dark and disturbing I never could have imagined. She walked up to my window, and I noticed her hands first, calloused, with chipped red nail polish and what looked like old scars across the knuckles. "Heading south?" she asked, her voice raspy like she'd smoked a pack a day for decades. I told her I was just planning to camp here for the night, get some footage of the sunset over the abandoned plant. She laughed at that, a sharp sound that made me uncomfortable. "You don't want to stay here, honey. Trust me, this place has a bad history." But she said it in a way that made me think she wasn't warning me away. She was testing me, seeing if I'd scare easy. And like an idiot, I took the bait and asked what she meant. And that's when her whole demeanor changed, became something else entirely, something that made my stomach tighten with a feeling I couldn't quite name yet, but would soon understand as genuine fear. She leaned against my van, real casual, like we were old friends catching up, and started telling me about how this processing plant used to be where they'd find bodies back in the 90s. "Girls mostly," she said, watching my reaction. "Hitchhikers, lot lizards, runaways. Cops never could figure out who was doing it." The way she talked about it wasn't like someone sharing local history. It was intimate, detailed, like she'd been there. She described how the bodies were found, wrapped in tarps, hidden in the old storage tanks where citrus concentrate used to ferment. I felt this creeping sensation up my spine, that primal instinct telling me something was wrong. But I just sat there listening because part of me thought maybe this was great content, you know? A local with dark stories about forgotten Florida. Then she asked if she could see inside the van, said she'd always been curious about these conversion builds. And here's where I made my biggest mistake. I said yes. I actually unlocked the door and let this stranger into my home on wheels while we were parked at an abandoned facility as the sun disappeared behind the palmetto trees. She climbed in, moving slow, taking in everything. My laptop on the little fold-down desk, my camera equipment, the bed in the back with Naomi's stupid decorative pillows she'd insisted I bring. "You alone?" she asked, and I lied without thinking, said my buddy was meeting me here in 20 minutes. She smiled at that, and this time it did reach her eyes, but not in a good way. "Sure he is," she said, running her finger along my kitchenette counter. That's when I noticed the knife on her belt. Not a little pocket knife, but a serious fixed blade, the kind hunters use. My mouth went dry. She caught me looking and laughed again, that same harsh sound. "Relax, I'm not gonna hurt you. Not unless you give me a reason." She sat down on my bench seat like she owned the place and started asking me questions. Where was I from? Did people know where I was? How often did I check in with family? Each question felt like she was cataloging information, building a profile. I tried to play it cool, kept my answers vague, but my hands were shaking when I reached for my water bottle. The scary thing was how normal she looked sitting there, just a middle-aged woman in a van, except for that predatory stillness she had, like a cat watching a bird. I told her I needed to get going, that I'd changed my mind about staying here, would head to a proper campground instead. She didn't move, just sat there studying me with these pale blue eyes that seemed to look right through all my bullshit. "You know what's funny?" she said. "Men always think they're safe. You pull over for me, let me in your van, and even now, even scared, you're still trying to be polite about kicking me out. Women don't do that. Women know better." She was right, and that realization hit me like ice water. I'd been raised to be helpful, to not be rude, and she'd counted on exactly that. My phone was on the passenger seat, maybe 4 feet away, but it felt like miles. If I lunged for it, would she use that knife? The light outside was almost gone now, everything turning that deep purple gray that comes right before full dark. "I'll tell you what," she finally said, standing up in the cramped space, and I could smell cigarettes and something else, something chemical and disturbing. "You give me a ride to the next town, Drop me at the truck stop off exit 52, and we forget this whole awkward situation. Sound fair? It didn't sound fair at all. It sounded like a terrible idea that would probably end with me dead in a ditch somewhere. But she was between me and the driver's seat, and that knife was right there on her hip, and I could feel my heart hammering so hard I thought she must be able to hear it. So I nodded, said sure, tried to keep my voice steady. She grinned at that, showing yellowed teeth, and moved toward the front. "Smart boy," she said, and I climbed into the driver's seat with her right behind me, close enough that I could feel her breath on my neck as I started the engine, my hands slippery with sweat on the steering wheel. The drive to exit 52 should have taken maybe 15 minutes, but it felt like hours with her sitting in my passenger seat, one hand resting casually near that knife. She talked the whole way, rambling stories about her life that got progressively darker and more disturbing. She told me about a trucker she'd killed in 1989, said it so matter-of-fact I thought maybe I'd misheard. But then she kept going, describing how he'd picked her up thinking he was getting something else entirely, and how surprised he'd been when she pulled a gun. "Self-defense," she said, looking out at the dark highway. That's what I told myself then. He was going to hurt me, so I hurt him first. The way she said it, I couldn't tell if she believed it or if she was testing me again, seeing how I'd react. I kept my eyes on the road, didn't say anything, just drove and prayed that another car would pass us, that I'd see blue lights in my rear view, anything. But Route 19 at night is desolate, just empty asphalt cutting through pine forests and swampland. She told me about the others too, 7 in total, she claimed, all men who'd picked her up on these same roads. "Florida's full of ghosts," she said. "People disappear down here all the time. Tourists, drifters, nobody important. Who's gonna miss them?" I wanted to tell her that everyone's important, that those were people with families and lives, but I couldn't make my mouth work right. Fear does that, just shuts you down in ways you can't prepare for until you're actually living through it. Then she asked about my YouTube channel, said she'd noticed the camera mounted to my dashboard. My stomach dropped. "That thing recording now?" she asked, leaning forward to look at it. I told her no, told her I only filmed during the day, for the light. Another lie, because it actually was recording. I turned it on out of habit when I started driving, part of my daily vlog routine. She reached for it anyway, and I thought this is it. She's gonna destroy the evidence. But she just examined it, turned it over in her hands. "Technology," she muttered. "Everybody's got cameras now. Makes things complicated." She set it back on the mount, slightly off angle, and I wondered if that footage would be the last thing of me anyone would see. Exit 52 appeared like a miracle, the green sign reflecting in my headlights. The truck stop was one of those big ones, a Pilot or a Love's, I can't remember which, with islands of harsh fluorescent light in the darkness. Cars and semis everywhere, people coming and going, witnesses, safety, civilization. I'd never been so happy to see a gas station in my life. I pulled into the parking lot, hands still shaking, and she opened her door before I'd even fully stopped. "Thanks for the ride, Derek," she said, using my name even though I'd never told her what it was. She must have seen it on something in the van, maybe mail or my laptop screen. That detail bothered me more than anything else, the intimacy of it, proof she'd been cataloging everything. She started to get out, then paused, turned back to look at me with those cold eyes. "Here's some advice, since you were so helpful. Get yourself a gun if you're going to keep doing this van life thing. Get a good deadbolt for that back door too. And maybe don't park in places where nobody can hear you scream." She said it friendly, almost motherly, which made it so much worse. Then she grabbed her duffel bag and walked toward the truck stop, just another tired traveler in the night. I sat there for a full 5 minutes, watching her disappear inside, making sure she wasn't coming back. My whole body was trembling now that the adrenaline was crashing, and I felt sick, actually nauseous with relief and residual terror. I drove to the far corner of the lot, parked under the brightest light I could find, and called Naomi with shaking fingers, needing to hear her voice, needing to tell someone what had just happened before the horror of it crushed me completely. Naomi answered on the 3rd ring, her voice thick with sleep. I'd forgotten it was past midnight back in Asheville. "Derek? What's wrong?" She could tell immediately something was off, that tone she gets when she switches into nurse mode, assessing the situation. I tried to explain what happened, but the words came out jumbled, disconnected. Woman with a knife, stories about murders, trapped in my own van. She kept asking if I was safe now, if I called the police, and I realized I hadn't even thought about calling 911. What would I say? A hitchhiker scared me and told me stories? She hadn't actually threatened me, not explicitly. And part of me, the stupid part that worries about looking foolish, didn't want to file a report that made me sound paranoid. But Naomi insisted, and she stayed on the phone with me while I walked into the truck stop, past the rows of energy drinks and trucker hats, to where a bored clerk stood behind bulletproof glass. I asked if they had security, if anyone had seen the woman who just came in. The clerk, maybe 19 with bad acne and a name tag that said Brandon, barely looked up from his phone. Lady with blonde hair? Yeah, she bought cigarettes and left out the back. Got into some guy's rig maybe 10 minutes ago. My heart sank. She was already gone, already on to the next one, and I had no proof of anything except my own fear in that dashboard camera footage. Brandon asked if there was a problem, and I couldn't figure out how to explain it in a way that didn't sound crazy, so I just said never mind and walked back outside. I spent the rest of the night in that parking lot, doors locked, periodically checking that woman wasn't somehow lurking nearby. Every sound made me jump, shopping carts rattling, diesel engines rumbling to life, voices carrying across the asphalt. I couldn't sleep, just sat there in the back of my van watching the camera footage on my laptop, studying her face, listening to her voice describe those murders. Was she telling the truth? Was she Aileen Wuornos somehow, even though that didn't make sense timeline-wise? Or was she just some disturbed person who'd read about the cases and inserted herself into them? The more I watched, the more convinced I became that she'd been confessing, that those stories were real, and I'd been sitting 3 feet from an actual serial killer. By morning, I'd made a decision. I drove straight to the nearest police station, a small municipal building in a town called Clearbrook. The officer who took my statement was professional, but skeptical. I could see it in his eyes. He took notes, asked me to email the footage, wanted descriptions and details I couldn't quite remember clearly through the fog of exhaustion and fear. Had she said specific dates? Names of victims? Locations of bodies? It all blurred together. He told me they'd look into it, run the description against known offenders, but I could tell he thought I was just another paranoid tourist with an overactive imagination. Lots of people tell stories around here, he said. Doesn't make them true. But he didn't understand. It wasn't just the stories that scared me. It was the way she told them, like she was reliving something precious and terrible. I left the station feeling worse than before, like I'd failed somehow. Failed those victims, failed myself. I sat in my van in the parking lot trying to decide what to do next. Go home to Asheville? Keep traveling? The whole Vanlife dream suddenly felt stupid and naive, like I'd been playing at being adventurous without understanding the real risks. My phone buzzed, Naomi calling again to check on me. Before I could answer, I saw it. A white pickup truck pulling into the lot, and there in the passenger seat, clear as day, was her. That blonde hair, that leather jacket. She was staring right at me through my windshield, and she was smiling. And in that moment, I understood with absolute horrifying clarity that this wasn't over, that she'd followed me here somehow, that whatever game she was playing with me had just entered a new and deeply disturbing phase that I had no idea how to escape. I dropped my phone and just stared back at her, frozen like a deer in headlights. The truck idled there for what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds. And then the driver, some older guy in a baseball cap, pulled away, heading back toward the highway. She never stopped smiling at me, never broke eye contact, and as they drove off I could see her laughing. Actually laughing like this was the funniest thing in the world. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grab my phone off the floor. I ran back into the police station, practically shouting at the desk sergeant that she was here, right here, but by the time an officer came out to look, the truck was long gone. They took down the description, white Ford F-150, Florida plates, couldn't remember the numbers, but I could see them exchanging glances, the universal look of this guy's losing it. The sergeant suggested I might want to consider heading home, that maybe the stress of solo travel was getting to me. That's when I lost it a little, started insisting they pull security footage from the parking lot, that they had to see I wasn't making this up. They agreed, more to calm me down than anything else, and we went inside to review the tapes. And there it was, the white truck pulling in, sitting for those 30 seconds, pulling away. You could see her in the passenger seat if you knew where to look, though the image was grainy enough that it wouldn't help identify her. Could be anyone. the officer said, and technically he was right. But I knew it was her. Knew it with the same certainty you know when you're being watched in the dark. I drove out of Clearbrook in a panic, not really thinking about where I was going, just needing to move. I headed east toward the Atlantic side, figuring I'd find a busy RV park where there'd be families and retirees and safety in numbers. My mind was racing with paranoid thoughts. Had she put some kind of tracker on my van? How else would she have found me at that specific police station? I pulled over at a rest area and spent an hour searching every inch of Bertha's exterior, looking for GPS devices or anything unusual. Nothing. Maybe it was just coincidence, I told myself, though I didn't believe it. Maybe she'd followed me from the truck stop. Maybe she had friends watching me. The possibilities were endless and terrifying. I ended up at a place called Ocean Breeze RV Resort, one of those massive complexes with hundreds of sites and a gate guard who checked IDs. It felt safe, or at least safer. I paid for 3 nights, backed into a spot between a family with young kids and an elderly couple with a motorhome the size of a bus. I locked myself inside Bertha and finally let myself fall apart a little, hands over my face, breathing hard, trying not to completely lose my shit. I called Naomi again, and this time I told her I was coming home, that I was done with this trip, done with van life, done with all of it. She didn't argue, just said she'd have coffee and dinner waiting whenever I got there. Hearing her voice, steady and sane and normal, made me realize how far into darkness I'd fallen over the last 24 hours. But here's the thing that still haunts me, the detail I couldn't shake then and can't shake now. That night at Ocean Breeze, secure behind locked doors in a well-lit campground surrounded by people, I heard a knock on my van. 3 slow taps, deliberate and patient. I was half asleep and thought maybe I'd imagined it, but then it came again. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just lay there in the dark listening. A woman's voice, muffled through the metal. "Derek, I know you're awake." It was her. I grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, but when I looked at the screen I had no signal, no bars, nothing, which made no sense in a populated RV park. The tapping continued, moving along the side of the van now, accompanied by that raspy laugh. "You can't hide from me, honey. I know where you are. I'll always know." I waited for someone else to hear it, for the family next door or the old couple to notice something was wrong, but nobody came. The tapping and the voice continued for maybe 5 minutes, circling my van like a predator, and then suddenly it stopped, and when I finally worked up the courage to look out the window at dawn, there was nobody there, just tire marks in the gravel that could have been from anyone, and a single cigarette but pressed into the dirt right outside my door, still smoldering like she'd just been there moments before, like she was always going to be there, waiting in the darkness for me to make another mistake. My name is Patricia Vance. I'm 52 years old, and I live in Savannah, Georgia. I'd been living in my converted Sprinter van full-time for about 3 years when I decided to winter in Florida. Seemed like the logical choice for someone trying to escape the damp Georgia cold. My daughter Emma, who's 28, thought I was going through some kind of crisis when I sold the house after her father died, but honestly, it was the opposite. For the first time in 30 years, I could go wherever I wanted without asking permission or coordinating schedules. The van life gave me freedom I'd never had, even if Emma called it running away from grief. I'd been parked at various spots along Florida's northeast coast for about 2 weeks, mostly Walmarts and rest stops, keeping a low profile. I had this whole system down. Solar panels kept my electronics charged, a gym membership for showers, and I'd learned which parking lots had the best cell reception for my remote bookkeeping work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I'd connected with a few other van lifers through online forums, people who understood this lifestyle wasn't about Instagram photos, but about genuine simplicity and independence. One of them, a guy named Marcus who was maybe 40, had mentioned this incredible boondocking spot near Ocala National Forest where you could camp for free on public land. The spot Marcus described was perfect, isolated enough for privacy, but close enough to town for supplies. I found it on a Thursday afternoon, a clearing off Forest Road 535 surrounded by massive oak trees dripping with Spanish moss. There were a few other vehicles scattered around, maybe a quarter mile between each setup, which felt about right. Not so crowded you couldn't relax, but not so empty you'd worry about safety. I backed my van into a level spot near the tree line, set up my camp chair outside, and cracked open the romance novel I'd been working through. The air smelled like pine and earth, and for the first time in weeks, I felt that tension in my shoulders start to release. By sunset, I'd noticed the RV parked about 200 yards to my east, one of those older models from the 80s, beige with brown stripes, the kind that looked like it had seen better days. A man was outside grilling something, the smoke drifting through the trees. He waved when he caught me looking, friendly enough, and I waved back, but didn't encourage conversation. That was one thing I'd learned about this lifestyle. Some people wanted community, wanted to share stories and beers around a campfire, but I preferred solitude. I'd spent 3 decades taking care of other people, a husband, a daughter, aging parents, and now I was taking care of myself. The man seemed to respect that, went back to his grilling, and I went back to my book as the light faded. What I didn't notice until it was almost dark was the third vehicle, tucked back in the shadows where the forest got dense, a white panel van with no windows, the kind contractors use for tools and equipment. Something about it bothered me, though I couldn't say exactly what. Maybe it was how deliberately hidden it seemed, or maybe it was just my imagination running wild from reading too many thriller novels. I told myself I was being paranoid, that plenty of people had work vans they traveled in. But as I locked myself inside my Sprinter for the night, double-checking the deadbolts I'd installed on both doors, I couldn't shake this creeping feeling of unease. The forest was completely quiet now. No crickets, no birds, nothing. And that silence felt wrong somehow, heavy and expectant, like something terrible and disturbing was holding its breath just beyond my windows, waiting for me to let my guard down. I woke up around 2 in the morning to the sound of an engine starting. Not unusual. People come and go at all hours when you're boondocking, heading out early for work, or just moving to a new spot. But this engine sounded close, really close, and when I peeked through my curtains I saw headlights sweeping across the clearing. It was that white panel van, crawling along the dirt road at maybe 5 miles an hour, like whoever was driving was searching for something. The headlights passed over my van, and I instinctively ducked down, heart suddenly pounding for reasons I couldn't quite explain. The van continued past, disappeared into the trees toward where that RV was parked, and then the engine cut off. Silence again, thick and oppressive. I lay there in the dark, trying to convince myself this was normal, that I was being ridiculous. But my gut, the same gut that had warned me about my husband's heart problems 6 months before the doctors found anything, was screaming that something was off. I grabbed my phone to check the Vanlife forum, see if anyone else was camped in this area, but I had no signal. No bars at all, which was weird because I'd had 3 bars when I'd arrived that afternoon. I tried to remember what Marcus had said about this spot. He'd called it peaceful, secluded, perfect for solo campers. Had he mentioned anything else? Any warnings? I couldn't recall, and now in the darkness, every detail felt significant and scary. Around 3:30, I heard voices. Male voices, muffled and distant, but definitely arguing about something. I cracked my window an inch, just enough to hear better, and caught fragments of conversation carried on the night breeze. Told you Tuesday, and can't keep doing this. And then something that made my blood run cold. Buried the last one near the creek. I pressed my ear to the window screen, barely breathing, trying to hear more, but the voices faded. Were they talking about garbage? An animal? Or something worse? My mind immediately went to the darkest possibilities, which I knew was probably unfair, but you don't survive as a woman alone by ignoring your instincts. I spent the rest of the night sitting up, watching through the gap in my curtains, phone in hand, even though it was useless without signal. Around 5, when the sky started to lighten from black to deep gray, I saw a movement near the RV. 2 figures, both men, one of them the guy I'd seen grilling. They were carrying something between them, something heavy wrapped in a tarp, loading it into the back of that white panel van. The way they moved was furtive, purposeful, and when one of them glanced around to check if anyone was watching, I pulled back from my window so fast I banged my elbow on the cabinet. Every horror story I'd ever heard about women disappearing while camping flooded my mind. Bodies found months later, cases that went cold, families left without answers. As soon as there was enough light to drive safely, I started my engine. I didn't care about being subtle or polite anymore. I just wanted out of there. But when I put the van in gear and started moving toward the exit road, That white panel then suddenly appeared, blocking my path. The driver got out, and I could see him clearly now in the dawn light. Maybe 55, weathered face, wearing coveralls stained with something dark. He walked toward my van with his hands up, like he was trying to appear non-threatening. But there was something about his smile that felt wrong, predatory and disturbing in a way that made every nerve in my body scream danger. He knocked on my window, that smile never wavering, and called out, "Hey there, neighbor. We should talk." I didn't roll down my window, just shook my head and pointed forward, universal sign for move your van. But he didn't move, just stood there still smiling. And now the other guy from the RV was walking over too. Younger, maybe early 30s, with the kind of build that suggested he worked with his hands. They flanked my driver's side door, boxing me in, and the older one knocked again, harder this time. "Come on now, don't be rude. We're just trying to be friendly." His tone was light, but there was an edge underneath, a threat wrapped in neighborly concern. My hand hovered over the door lock button, double-checking it was engaged, and I could feel sweat forming on my palms despite the cool morning air. The younger guy circled around to my passenger side, peering in through the windows, checking out my setup. I watched him in my side mirror, saw him try the door handle. Locked. Thank God. And then he said something to the older guy I couldn't quite hear. They both laughed, and it was the kind of laughter that makes you understand you're the punchline of a joke you don't want to be part of. The older one leaned close to my window, close enough that his breath fogged the glass. "Lady, I don't think you understand the situation here. This is our spot. We've been using this location for our business for 5 years now, and we can't have people just rolling up and camping wherever they want. Creates complications, you understand? Business." The word hung there, loaded with implications. What kind of business operated out of a beat-up RV and a windowless van in the middle of a national forest? Nothing legal, that was certain. My mind raced through possibilities. Drugs, maybe? That would explain the secrecy, the odd hours, the wrapped bundle they'd been moving. But something about the way he said complications made me think it was worse than that. Something that explained why they were so concerned about a middle-aged woman in a Sprinter van who'd literally just shown up yesterday. I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to see, or they thought I had, and now I was a problem that needed solving. I made a split-second decision and threw the van into reverse, cranking the wheel hard. The tires spun in the sandy dirt, and for a horrible moment I thought I was stuck, but then I lurched backward, branches scraping my roof as I backed into the trees. The two men jumped aside, and I could see the older one's face change, that fake friendly expression dropping away to reveal something cold and angry underneath. I shifted into drive and cut the wheel the other direction, trying to get around the white panel van. But the clearing was too narrow and the trees too dense. I was trapped, basically, unless I wanted to risk tearing out my transmission trying to drive through the underbrush, and these guys knew it. The older one walked back to the panel van and pulled something out of the cab, a shotgun, held casually but unmistakably there. He didn't point it at me, didn't even really acknowledge it, just carried it like it was an extension of his arm. "Now you've gone and made things difficult," he called out, his voice carrying clear across the 30 feet between us. "We were trying to do this the easy way. Could have just had a conversation, worked something out, but you had to be difficult." The younger guy was on his phone now, or maybe a radio, talking to someone, and I realized with dawning horror that there might be more of them, that this wasn't just two guys but something bigger, more organized. The forest that had seemed so peaceful yesterday now felt like a trap, and I was caught right in the middle of something scary and violent that I didn't understand but knew I needed to escape before it was too late. I sat there with my engine running, trying to think clearly through the panic. The shotgun changed everything. I couldn't just bull my way past them, couldn't risk getting shot. My phone was still useless, no signal, and screaming for help would be pointless out here with nobody around to hear. Emma's face flashed through my mind, and I thought about how she'd said I was being reckless, how she'd warned me that something like this could happen. I'd laughed it off, told her I was careful, that I'd taken self-defense classes and had pepper spray. A lot of good that did me now against two men with a gun and God knows who else on the way. The younger guy finished his call and jogged back to the RV, disappeared inside. The older one just stood there watching me, shotgun resting in the crook of his arm, patient as death. Minutes crawled by, 5, 10, 15, and nothing happened. It was almost worse than if they'd rushed me immediately. This waiting, this psychological torture. I kept scanning the tree line, looking for an escape route, but everywhere I looked was thick palmetto scrub and oak trees, impossible to navigate in a van. Then I heard it. Another engine, coming from deeper in the forest, growing louder. A truck emerged from a trail I hadn't even noticed, a dirty green Ford Ranger with 2 more men inside. They parked next to the panel van and got out, both of them looking at my Sprinter like it was a problem to be solved. One was huge, probably 6'4" and 300 pounds, wearing a stained wife beater and jeans. The other was smaller, wiry, with a face that had seen too much sun and too many drugs, that hollow-cheeked look tweakers get. 4 of them now, and I was one 52-year-old woman with no phone signal and no way out. The big guy walked over to the older one with the shotgun, and they talked quietly, heads close together, occasionally glancing my way. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could imagine what to do about me, how to handle this complication, whether to let me go or make me disappear like whatever had been wrapped in that tarp. The older one finally walked toward my van again, leaving the shotgun with the big guy. A calculated move, trying to seem less threatening maybe. He came right up to my window and tapped on it, gentle this time, almost apologetic. "Look, I know you're scared. I get it. This looks bad. But here's the situation. We've got a hunting operation out here. Gator hunting. Perfectly legal with the right permits. That bundle you maybe saw us moving? 300-pound gator we trapped last night. The secrecy is because we've had problems with animal rights people trying to sabotage our traps, filing false reports with Fish and Wildlife. You understand?" He said it smooth, rehearsed, and for a second I almost wanted to believe him because the alternative was too terrifying to fully accept. But I'd lived 52 years and I wasn't stupid. Gator hunters don't operate out of beat-up RVs in hidden clearings. They don't have 4 guys standing around looking nervous when one woman stumbles onto their hunting operation. And they sure as hell don't block people in and pull shotguns for an innocent misunderstanding. No, these guys were into something dark and illegal, and I'd had the bad luck to park right in the middle of it. The older one must have seen the disbelief on my face because his expression hardened. "Tell you what," he said, voice dropping lower. "You're going to turn off that engine and come inside the RV. We're going to have a longer conversation about what you saw and what you think you saw. And depending on how that conversation goes, maybe you drive out of here in a few hours, no harm done. Or maybe..." He didn't finish the sentence, just let it hang there, full of horrifying implications that made my stomach turn and my hands grip the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. I looked at him through the glass and said the only thing I could think of: my daughter knows exactly where I am. I checked in with her last night, sent her the GPS coordinates. If I don't call her by 9 this morning, she's calling the police. It was a lie. I hadn't talked to Emma in 3 days and she had no idea where I was camping, but I said it with as much conviction as I could muster. The older man's eyes narrowed, calculating, trying to figure out if I was bluffing. Behind him, the tweaker-looking guy was pacing, agitated, talking to himself or maybe to the others, I couldn't tell. The big guy with the shotgun just watched everything with dead eyes, like he'd seen this play out before and knew how it ended. Then something unexpected happened. A park ranger's truck came bouncing down the access road, the official green and tan unmistakable even at a distance. All 4 men tensed, and the older one stepped back from my van, plastering that fake friendly smile back on his face. The ranger pulled up, a woman maybe in her late 30s with her hair pulled back in a tight bun, and climbed out looking annoyed. "Y'all know this area's been closed to camping since Monday," she said, pulling out a citation book. "County found some contaminated soil near the old phosphate mine. Wants everyone cleared out until they finish testing. I've been driving around all morning moving people along." She looked at me through my windshield. "That means you too, ma'am. Time to pack up and head out." I've never been so happy to see an authority figure in my entire life. I nodded vigorously, started to put my van in gear, but the older man spoke up, still playing his role. "Officer, we were just explaining the situation to this lady. We're permitted gator hunters working this area, and we were concerned she might have accidentally damaged one of our trap lines driving in here." The ranger looked at him skeptically. "Gator season doesn't start until August, sir. And this area isn't zoned for commercial trapping anyway." She walked over to the white panel van, peered in through the driver's window, and her whole demeanor changed. Her hand went to the radio on her shoulder. "Central, this is Ranger Kowalski. I'm going to need backup at Forest Road 535, about 2 miles in from the gate. Multiple individuals and vehicles, possible poaching situation. Everything happened fast after that. The tweaker guy bolted, just took off running into the trees. The big guy dropped the shotgun and put his hands up immediately, like he'd done this before and knew better than to resist. The younger one from the RV tried to get to the panel van, but the ranger drew her sidearm and ordered everyone to stay put. And her voice had that kind of authority that freezes you in place even if you're not the one in trouble. The older man's face went through about 5 different emotions in 3 seconds. Anger, fear, calculation, resignation, before he too raised his hands. The ranger kept her gun trained on them while talking into her radio, giving descriptions, requesting immediate assistance, and I just sat there in my van watching it unfold like a nightmare finally turning into something I could wake up from. 20 minutes later, the forest was full of police vehicles, county sheriff, more park rangers, even a K-9 unit. They had all 4 men in handcuffs, and a detective was photographing the inside of the panel van while crime scene techs set up equipment. Ranger Kowalski came over to take my statement, and that's when I learned what I'd really stumbled into. The men weren't gator hunters. They were part of a body disposal operation connected to a serial killer who'd been operating in Central Florida for almost a decade. The killer himself, a man named Robert Yates who worked as a long-haul trucker, would pick up victims along the highways and bring them to this location where his crew would help him dispose of the remains in the vast swamplands of the national forest. That tarp I'd seen them moving at dawn contained what was left of a woman who'd gone missing from a rest stop near Jacksonville 2 weeks earlier. I'd almost become another victim, another complication that needed to disappear into the same swamp. And the only thing that saved me was pure dumb luck. A ranger doing routine evacuations because of soil contamination that probably didn't even exist, just bureaucratic caution that happened to put her in the right place at the right time. I drove out of that forest 3 hours later after giving my statement, hands still shaking on the wheel, and I didn't stop driving until I reached Emma's apartment in Jacksonville, where I broke down completely and told her she'd been right about everything, that I was done with van life, done with being alone, done with pretending I didn't need anyone, because the truth was I'd gotten so close to becoming just another scary statistic, another missing person whose face would eventually fade from the news, and that disturbing reality was something I knew I'd never fully escape no matter how far I drove. My name is Leonard Briggs. I'm 37 years old, and I live in Portland, Maine. I'd gotten into van life about 6 months back after my divorce finalized and my ex-wife got the house. Seemed like the perfect time to just say screw it and hit the road. I'd converted an old Chevy Express cargo van. Nothing fancy, just the basics. A bed platform, some storage cubbies, a cooler for food, and a battery setup to charge my laptop. My buddy Tyler, who's 35 and still living the bachelor life back in Portland, thought I was insane. "You're gonna freeze to death or get murdered," he'd said, half joking. I'd laughed it off then, told him I needed an adventure, needed to feel alive again after 2 years of dead marriage and lawyer meetings. Florida seemed like the obvious choice for January. Warm weather, cheap camping, plenty of places to disappear for a while. I'd been following this van life YouTuber who'd done a whole series on stealth camping in the Tampa area, showed all these spots where you could park overnight without getting hassled. Strip mall parking lots, quiet residential streets, even some areas near the beach if you knew where to look. I wasn't trying to build a social media following or anything, just wanted to exist somewhere warm for a few months while I figured out what the hell came next in my life. Maybe find some seasonal work, save up money, eventually head west to Colorado or Montana. I'd been in the Tampa area for about a week, rotating between different spots, when I found this perfect little neighborhood in a place called Temple Terrace. Tree-lined streets, older houses, the kind of area where people minded their own business. There was this one street, River Hills Drive, that dead-ended at a small park overlooking the Hillsborough River. At night it was completely quiet, no through traffic, just the occasional dog walker. I'd parked there twice already without any problems, just pulled in around 10 at night, kept my lights off, slept until 6, and rolled out before the neighborhood really woke up. It was perfect, or so I thought. The third night I parked there, I noticed a car already in the lot when I arrived. A brown sedan, Maybe a Buick or an Oldsmobile, something from the 90s. Nobody inside that I could see, which struck me as odd but not alarming. Probably just someone who'd left their car and gotten a ride somewhere else. I backed into my usual spot at the far end of the lot, killed the engine, and started my evening routine. Ate a sandwich, checked my phone, read for a while by headlamp. Around 11, I heard a car door slam and peeked through my curtains. A man was getting into that brown sedan, but here's what made my skin crawl. He'd come from the direction of the houses, walking through the park in total darkness, carrying what looked like a gym bag. He sat in his car for maybe 10 minutes, just sitting there in the dark, not starting the engine, not doing anything. Then his dome light came on, and I got a good look at him. White guy, maybe late 40s, receding hairline. Completely unremarkable except for the intensity of his focus as he went through that bag, examining something I couldn't see from my angle. He pulled out what looked like jewelry, held it up to the light, then carefully put it back. The whole thing felt wrong, deeply wrong, like I was watching something I shouldn't be seeing. He finally started his car and drove away slowly, headlights off until he reached the street, and I sat there in my van with my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't quite articulate, just knowing that whatever I'd witnessed was something scary and disturbing that I really wished I hadn't seen. I didn't sleep well that night, kept waking up at every sound, imagining that brown sedan coming back. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself I was being paranoid, that the guy was probably just some weirdo who liked to sit in parking lots at night, maybe dealing with insomnia or personal problems. People do strange things, doesn't make them dangerous. But when I drove past the houses on my way out, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Police cars. 3 of them, parked in front of a pale yellow ranch-style home about 2 blocks from where I'd been camping. Neighbors were standing on their lawns in bathrobes, and I could see crime scene tape going up. I should have kept driving, minded my own business, but curiosity got the better of me. I pulled over a block away and walked back, trying to look casual, just another concerned citizen wanting to know what happened. An older woman with curlers in her hair was talking to her neighbor, and I overheard fragments. Carol didn't show up for her bridge game, and found her this morning when her daughter came by. And then the part that made everything click into a horrible pattern. Strangled, they think, sometime last night. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Last night, while I was parked right there, close enough to maybe hear something if I'd been paying attention, a woman named Carol had been murdered in her home. And that man in the brown sedan, walking through the darkness carrying a bag of what looked like jewelry, had I witnessed him leaving the scene? The rational part of my brain said I was jumping to conclusions, that this could all be coincidence, but the rest of me knew better. I'd seen something, maybe seen the killer himself, and now I had a decision to make. Go to the cops and tell them what? That I saw a guy in a parking lot. That he had a bag? They want to know why I was there, and stealth camping wasn't exactly legal. I could get ticketed, maybe even arrested for trespassing, and for what? A description so vague it could match 10,000 guys in Tampa. I walked back to my van in a daze, climbed inside, and just sat there trying to think. My phone buzzed, Tyler texting me some meme about Florida being America's armpit. Any other day I would have laughed, but right now it felt surreal, like he was reaching out from a normal world I'd somehow left behind. I typed back, something weird happened, but then deleted it. What was I gonna say? That I might have seen a murderer? That I was camping illegally in a neighborhood where women were getting killed? He'd tell me to go to the police immediately, and he'd be right, but something stopped me. Fear, maybe, or stupidity, or that male tendency to think you can handle things yourself without asking for help. I decided to leave the area, find somewhere else to park for a while, give myself time to process. But as I pulled away from the curb, I saw it in my rear-view mirror, that brown sedan, parked on a side street about 50 yards back. Same car, I was almost certain, and as I watched, it pulled out and started following me. My mouth went dry. Was I being paranoid? Tampa probably had hundreds of brown sedans from the 90s. But this one stayed 3 or 4 car lengths back, matching my speed exactly, following me through turns I made at random just to test if I was really being tailed. Left on Fletcher, right on Nebraska, left again on Fowler, and that brown sedan stayed right there behind me, never getting closer, but never dropping back either. And I realized with growing horror that somehow, maybe through a license plate or just bad luck, the man from last night knew I'd been there, knew I'd seen him, and now he was following me to find out what I was going to do about it. I drove aimlessly for 20 minutes, my eyes darting between the road and that brown sedan in my mirror. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel, and I kept running through options in my head. Pull into a police station? But what if I was wrong? What if this wasn't even the same car and I'd look like a lunatic? Drive to a crowded area? The sedan followed me into a busy shopping center parking lot, and I thought maybe he'd back off with all these witnesses around, but he just parked a few rows away and waited. I could see him through his windshield now, and yeah, it was definitely the same guy from last night. He was watching me, not even trying to hide it, and that somehow made it scarier than if he'd been sneaking around. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, neither of us moving, this weird standoff in a Target parking lot at 9 in the morning. Shoppers walked past oblivious, pushing carts, hurting kids, living their normal lives while I was trapped in this nightmare. Finally, I saw him get out of his car and start walking toward me, and that's when I panicked. I started my van and tore out of that parking lot, nearly clipping a Honda Civic, the driver laying on her horn as I swerved past. The brown sedan was back in my mirror within seconds, and now we were in a low-speed chase through Tampa suburbs, which sounds almost funny, except my heart was hammering and I was terrified of what would happen if I stopped. I tried calling 911, but my hands were shaking so bad I dropped the phone, and by the time I'd fumbled it off the floor mat, we were on the highway. I-275 heading south, and he was right there, maybe 2 car lengths back now. I merged into the right lane, then the left, weaving through traffic trying to lose him, but he matched every move. Other drivers were honking at both of us, probably thinking we were road-raging idiots, having no idea what was really happening. My gas gauge caught my eye, quarter tank, maybe less. I'd been meaning to fill up that morning, and now it might cost me everything. If I ran out of fuel on the highway with this guy behind me, I was done. An exit appeared, Gibsonton, wherever the hell that was, and I took it at the last second, cutting across 2 lanes. The sedan followed, and we ended up on some back road lined with rundown strip clubs and trailer parks, the kind of area that looked like it hadn't changed since 1987. The traffic thinned out to nothing, just me and him on this empty road, and I realized he'd been hurting me here, forcing me away from witnesses and populated areas into somewhere isolated where he could finish whatever he'd started. My mouth tasted like copper, that metallic fear taste, and I was breathing in short gasps trying not to completely lose it. Then I saw salvation, a sheriff's substation, just a small building with 2 patrol cars parked outside, but it might as well have been a fortress. I whipped into the parking lot, jumped out of my van before it even fully stopped, and ran for the entrance. Behind me, I heard the brown sedan's tires squeal as he braked hard, and when I looked back, he was stopped in the middle of the road, just sitting there watching me. Our eyes met across maybe 30 yards of distance, and his expression was completely calm, almost amused, like he knew something I didn't. Then he slowly drove away, not speeding, not acting suspicious, just a guy in a brown sedan going about his day. And somehow that was more disturbing than anything else. The confidence, the lack of concern, like he knew this wasn't over and he had all the time in the world to finish what he'd started. The deputy who took my statement was in his mid-20s, looked like he'd just graduated from the academy maybe 6 months ago. His name tag said Rodriguez, and he listened to everything I said with this expression that walked the line between concerned and skeptical. I told him about the parking lot, the man with the bag, the murder I'd heard about, the chase through Tampa. He took notes, asked for descriptions, height, weight, hair color, vehicle details, and I gave him everything I could remember. "You get a plate number?" he asked, and I felt like an idiot because of course I hadn't. I'd been too busy panicking to think clearly. He said they'd look into it, contact Tampa PD about the homicide, maybe pull security footage from the shopping center. But then came the questions I'd been dreading. Where exactly was I parked when I witnessed this? Was I a resident of that neighborhood? When I explained the Vanlife situation, his whole demeanor shifted slightly. Not hostile, but definitely less sympathetic. He explained that stealth camping was illegal in most of Tampa, that I could be cited for trespassing, that maybe I should consider staying at an actual campground. I wanted to scream that I was reporting a potential murder witness sighting, and he was worried about parking violations, but I kept my mouth shut and nodded. He said someone would follow up with me, took my phone number, and basically dismissed me. I sat in my van in that parking lot for another hour, trying to figure out what to do next. Part of me wanted to just drive north, Get the hell out of Florida entirely. Go back to Maine where at least I understood the dangers. Black ice and nor'easters, not serial killers following you through strip mall parking lots. But leaving felt like cowardice, and besides, what if that guy found his next victim because I hadn't pushed hard enough to make the cops take this seriously? I called Tyler, needed to hear a friendly voice, and ended up telling him everything. His response was immediate. Get out of there, man. Right now? Drive to the nearest airport and fly home. I'll buy the ticket. I almost did it. Almost drove straight to Tampa International and abandoned the van. Abandoned this whole stupid adventure. But then I got a call from a Tampa detective, a woman named Sarah Ortiz, who said she'd been briefed by Deputy Rodriguez and wanted to ask me some follow-up questions. Could I come to the station downtown? Something in her tone was different from the deputy's, sharper, more urgent. And when I arrived an hour later, she sat me down in an interview room and showed me a photo array. 6 pictures of middle-aged white guys, all similar looking, and I recognized him immediately. 3rd row, 2nd photo. That's him, I said, tapping the picture. That's the guy from the parking lot. Detective Ortiz's face went pale. She excused herself, came back 5 minutes later with another detective, an older guy with gray hair who introduced himself as Lieutenant Morrison. Mr. Briggs, he said, sitting down across from me. The man you just identified is named Robert Sands. He's been on our radar for 3 years as a potential suspect in a series of home invasions and murders throughout the Tampa Bay area. 8 victims so far, all elderly women living alone. He gains entry somehow. We think he poses as a utility worker or repairman, and then he strangles them and takes jewelry as trophies. We've never been able to prove it was him because he's incredibly careful, leaves no physical evidence, and until now we've had 0 witnesses. He leaned forward, and I could see the intensity in his eyes. You may have just given us our first real break in this case, but I need you to understand something. If Robert Sands knows you saw him, if he thinks you can identify him, you're in serious danger. This man has killed 8 women that we know of, and he won't hesitate to make you number 9. They put me in protective custody immediately, not jail, but a hotel room paid for by the department with a patrol car stationed outside. Detective Ortiz explained that they were moving fast, getting warrants for Sands's home and vehicle, trying to build a case before he could destroy evidence or run. They needed me to testify eventually, needed my eyewitness account of him leaving that crime scene with the victim's jewelry. I sat in that generic hotel room, watching cable news and eating takeout they brought me, feeling like I'd stumbled into someone else's life. 3 days ago, I was just a divorced guy living in a van, and now I was a protected witness in a serial killer investigation. The second night, around 11, I heard shouting outside my door. I looked through the peephole and saw 2 deputies struggling with someone in the hallway. A man in a maintenance uniform who was screaming that he needed to check the air conditioning unit in my room. They had him face down on the carpet, handcuffing him, and even from my distorted peephole view, I could see it was Robert Sands. He'd found me somehow, had gotten into the hotel dressed as a repairman, his signature move, and if those deputies hadn't been extra vigilant, he would have gotten to me. The thought made me physically sick. I backed away from the door and sat on the bed, shaking, while they hauled him away. Detective Ortiz came by an hour later to tell me they had him in custody, that he'd been carrying a knife and zip ties in his toolbox along with actual HVAC equipment. They'd searched his house and found a storage locker absolutely filled with jewelry from his victims. Rings, necklaces, bracelets, all cataloged and organized like a museum collection. They'd also found newspaper clippings about each murder, notes he'd written to himself, even photographs he'd taken of the victims after killing them. It was worse than anyone had imagined, more organized and cold-blooded. He's a textbook serial killer, Ortiz said. Kept trophies, documented everything. Probably would have kept going until someone stopped him. You stopped him. I didn't feel like a hero though. I felt scared and sick and angry that I'd almost died because I'd picked the wrong parking lot on the wrong night. They told me I could go home to Maine, that they had enough evidence now without my testimony, though it would strengthen the case if I stayed for the trial. I said I'd think about it, but I already knew my answer. I was done with Florida, done with van life, done with pretending that freedom meant living out of a van and parking in random neighborhoods. Real freedom, I realized, meant being safe enough to sleep without worrying that someone might try to murder you in the night. I drove back to Maine 2 days later, took the coastal route up through the Carolinas and Virginia, stayed at truck stops and rest areas where there were lights and people. When I finally rolled into Portland, Tyler was waiting at his apartment with beer and pizza, and I told him the whole story start to finish. He didn't say, "I told you so," which I appreciated. 6 months later, they convicted Robert Sands of 9 murders. They'd found evidence of a 9th victim in his documentation. I flew back to Tampa to watch the sentencing. Needed to see it end properly. They gave him life without parole, multiple consecutive sentences, and as they let him out of the courtroom, he looked right at me and smiled. That same calm, amused expression he'd had when I ran into the sheriff's station. Like even now, locked away forever, he'd won something. I sold the van after that, got an apartment, went back to a normal life. But I still have nightmares sometimes about brown sedans following me through empty parking lots, about maintenance men knocking on my door in the middle of the night, about how close I came to being another trophy in a killer's collection. Just another scary story about someone who thought they were safe until they realized too late that monsters are real, and they don't always look like monsters until it's too late to run.